In the untamed expanse of the American frontier, where justice was scarce and mercy even rarer, a single act of courage would forever change two lives. As flames devoured Sarah Mitchell's homestead, ruthless outlaws closed in like wolves on wounded prey. They thought she was alone, an easy target, but they hadn't counted on Jake Cooper, a quiet cowboy with nothing left to lose, who'd rather take bullets meant for someone else than stand idle while evil triumphed. The sound of gunfire shattered the dawn, each shot finding its mark in Jake's weathered frame as he shielded the widow with his own body. But sometimes the greatest rewards come from sacrifices we make without expecting anything in return. Wood. The scars, etched into his flesh, led to the healing his lonely heart had always yearned for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Montana sky in watercolor strokes of amber and rose as Jake Cooper eased himself onto the worn porch steps of his rented cabin. Steam rose from the tin cup of coffee in his weathered hands, dancing with the early morning mist that clung to the foothills. His gaze drifted to Thunder, his aging bay horse, grazing peacefully in the modest paddock nearby. Inside the cabin, atop a rough-hewn table, lay his mother's Bible. Its leather cover, softened by decades of faithful hands, contained more than just scripture. Between its well-worn pages rested pressed wildflowers, Indian paintbrush and mountain, lupine, and a letter written in his mother's delicate hand, the last one she'd penned before passing. "Remember, Jacob," it read, "a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he's willing to give." Those words had guided him through 20 years of ranch work, through cattle drives and long winters, through prosperous seasons and lean ones. Now, at 45, they seemed to carry a weight he hadn't fully understood in his younger years. Jake set down his coffee and pulled the worn Bible into his lap. His calloused fingers traced the familiar creases in its spine, remembering how his mother would read by lamplight after long days working their small homestead. The memory brought both comfort and a familiar ache, the kind that came with knowing those days were forever behind him. Thunder nickered softly, drawing Jake's attention. The horse's coat had more grey around the muzzle now, matching the silver threading through Jake's own dark hair. They'd grown old together, he and Thunder, sharing the same quiet dignity that came from years of honest work. Rising from the steps, Jake tucked the Bible under his arm and walked to the paddock. The morning routine beckoned. Horses to feed, fence rails to mend, and a meeting in town with the bank about extending his loan. The latter thought sat heavy in his stomach, souring the morning's peace. 3 years of drought had taken their toll on small operations like his. The meager savings he'd put aside from his years as a ranch hand had dwindled to almost nothing. Pride had kept him from seeking help, even when old friends offered. A man ought to stand on his own 2 feet. His father had always said, but standing alone was getting harder with each passing season. Jake reached the paddock and leaned against the rail, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and hay. Thunder ambled over, nudging his shoulder with a velvety nose. "At least you're not worried about banknotes, old friend," Jake murmured, producing a wrinkled apple from his coat pocket. The horse's gentle lips plucked it from his palm, with practiced care. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist and revealing the vast expanse of territory that had drawn him here years ago. The land still held promise, despite everything. Something about the way the mountains touched the sky, the way wild grass rippled like waves in the wind. It spoke of possibilities. His mother would have appreciated that, he thought. She'd always said God wrote his finest poetry in landscapes. Jake straightened, squaring his shoulders against the weight of uncertainty. The Bible in his hands held more than memories and pressed. Flowers. It held a reminder that life's greatest treasures often came disguised as trials. Whatever the day might bring, he'd face it with the quiet dignity his parents had instilled in him. Thunder watched as Jake headed toward the barn, the morning sun casting their shared shadow long across the dew-dampened grass. Neither man Nor, horse could have known that by sunset, everything they knew about life's careful routines would be forever changed. Sarah Mitchell's fingers found the golden locket at her throat, a habit born of both comfort and worry. Inside, two faded photographs faced each other across the locket's divide. Her father, Harrison Wells, stern-faced but with kindness in his eyes, and her late husband, Thomas, smiling with all the optimism that had marked his brief time on Earth. The metal was warm against her palm as she stood at her cabin's window, watching the first light creep across her 15 acres. The land had been Thomas's dream. "Think of it, Sarah," he'd said, eyes bright with possibility. "Our own piece of heaven away from your father's shadow." He'd been right about the heaven part. The valley cupped their homestead like hands in prayer, with pine-covered hills rising to meet the morning sun. But Thomas hadn't lived long enough to see their first harvest. Pneumonia had taken him during their second winter, leaving Sarah to carry their dream alone. Her father's latest letter lay unopened on the rough-hewn table behind her. She could guess its contents without breaking the seal. Another plea to return to the Wells Ranch. Another offer to set things right. But pride and something deeper kept her rooted to this soil. Thomas had believed in her strength long before she recognized it in herself. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road that wound past her property. Victor Blackwood's men making their morning patrol of what they already considered their territory. Sarah's jaw tightened. They'd been watching her place with increasing interest since Thomas's death, like vultures circling wounded prey. "Your husband's gone, Mrs. Mitchell," Blackwood had said during his last visit, his smile never reaching his eyes. "A woman alone can't manage land like this. I'm offering fair price, more than fair, considering the circumstances." When she'd declined, his smile had turned cold. "Things happen to lone homesteads, Mrs. Mitchell. Accidents, fires. Best to sell while you can still get something for it." Sarah touched the locket again, drawing strength from the simple weight of it. Her father might disapprove of her choices, but he'd taught her well. Harrison Wells hadn't built the largest ranch in the territory by bowing to threats. "The moment you show weakness," he'd often said, "is the moment they know they can take what's yours." Moving to the kitchen, Sarah stoked the morning fire with practiced efficiency. The familiar routine helped steady her nerves. Coffee brewing, biscuits in the oven, eggs from her small hen house waiting to be fried. She'd learned to find comfort in these solitary meals, though sometimes the silence pressed in like a physical thing. Through the window, she could see the garden she and Thomas had planted together. The rows weren't as straight as they'd been. When he was alive, she'd never quite mastered his eye for precision, but the vegetables grew strong and true. Like her, they were survivors, taking whatever the Montana weather threw at them and turning it into sustenance. A sharp rap at the door scattered her thoughts. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the shotgun propped beside the stove, another of her father's lessons. "A lady should be prepared," he'd insisted, teaching her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold the gun steady. The lessons had served her well in the years since Thomas's passing. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice was unfamiliar, but carried an official tone that set her nerves humming. "Deputy Marshal Collins, ma'am. Got some papers you need to see." Sarah's fingers tightened around the locket. Whatever came through that door, she would face it as she had faced everything else since Thomas's death, with quiet dignity and steel in her spine. The land was hers, bought with love and grief and backbreaking work, and like the generations of Wells women before her, she would defend what was hers, no matter the cost. Victor Blackwood studied the land deed spread across his mahogany desk, his manicured fingers tracing the property lines that had become an obsession. Sarah Mitchell's 15 acres sat like a missing puzzle piece in the center of his carefully assembled empire. A crystal tumbler of bourbon caught the afternoon light, throwing amber shadows across the document's official seal. "She still won't budge?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. His man Jenkins stood near the door, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the opulent surroundings of Blackwood's study. "No, sir. Says the land ain't for sale at any price." Jenkins shifted his weight. Seems she's got her daddy's stubborn streak. Blackwood's lip curled slightly. Harrison Wells. The name alone left a bitter taste. The old rancher had blocked his expansion plans more than once, but this was different. This was personal. Having his daughter standing in the way of progress felt like Wells himself was mocking him from across the territory. "The law's on our side now," Blackwood said, lifting a fresh document from his desk drawer. "Judge Preston signed the water rights adjustment this morning. Without access to the creek, that land won't support a blade of grass by summer's end." The new paper joined the deed on his desk, another piece in his carefully constructed plan. 20 years of building influence, of knowing which hands to shake and which to grease, had taught him that patience was a weapon as surely as any gun. "What about the marshal's office?" Jenkins asked. "Word is they're sending someone to look into the mother homestead fires." Blackwood waved away the concern. "Marshal Evans understands the importance of progress. He's a reasonable man who appreciates the value of civil development." The bourbon caught the light again as he raised it. "Besides, accidents happen in this territory. Nature can be cruel to those who try to tame her alone." Rising from his desk, Blackwood moved to the window. Below, the town of Silver Creek spread out like a model railroad set, neat and ordered. Everything in its proper place. He'd built this town from nothing, turned a dusty crossroads into a testament to civilization. The Mitchell property was just one more piece to acquire, one more step toward his vision of progress. "Give her 3 days," he said finally. "Let her feel the weight of isolation, then make the offer again." He turned back to Jenkins, his voice dropping to a quiet that was more threatening than any shout. "If she refuses, remind her that winter's incoming. Remind her how easy it is for a woman alone to have unfortunate accidents." Jenkins nodded, understanding the unspoken command. As the door closed behind him, Blackwood returned to his desk, lifting the deed once more. The paper was yellowed with age, its corners soft from frequent handling. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. But he'd learned early that power lay in these official documents as surely as in the gun at his hip. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere out there, Sarah Mitchell was probably watching the same sunset, foolishly believing she could hold on to her little piece of paradise through sheer determination. Women like her, clinging to romantic notions of homesteading, never understood the larger picture. Progress couldn't be stopped by sentiment or stubborn pride. Blackwood carefully returned the deed to its drawer, locking it away with the other pieces of his empire. By winter, the Mitchell property would be his, one way or another. And if Sarah Mitchell stood in the way of progress, well, the territory had ways of dealing with obstacles. The bourbon glowed like fire in his glass as he raised it in a silent toast to the coming storm. The crack of splintering wood echoed. Through the valley like a gunshot, Sarah's wagon lurched sharply, the right wheel giving way with a groan of protest. She managed to keep the horses steady as the vehicle settled at an awkward angle, but her heart sank at the sight of the broken wheel. Of all days for this to happen, market day, when she needed to sell her preserves and eggs to make the month's payment. The morning sun was already hot on her shoulders as she climbed down to inspect the damage. The wheel had split clean through, an old crack beyond any quick repair she might manage. Sarah pushed back her bonnet, wiping her brow with a sleeve. The nearest help was miles away, and Blackwood's men would surely pass by soon on their morning patrol. "Looks like you could use a hand, ma'am." The voice startled her. A rider had approached so quietly she hadn't heard him coming, his bay horse's hooves muffled by the soft dirt road. The man sat easy in his saddle, neither too close nor too far, a respectful distance that spoke of good manners. "I don't mean to trouble you, sir," Sarah said, one hand unconsciously finding her locket. "I'm sure I can manage." The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime around horses. Up close, she could see the years etched in his weathered face, though his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his worn hat. "Jake Cooper," he said simply, touching the hat's brim, "and no trouble at all. Wouldn't be right to leave a lady stranded." Something in his manner put her at ease. Perhaps the quiet dignity in his bearing, or the way he kept his movements. Slow and deliberate, like someone used to gentling nervous horses. He examined the broken wheel with practiced eyes, his silence thoughtful rather than awkward. "The hub's still good," he said finally. "With your permission, I might be able to splice in a temporary repair. Get you to town at least." Sarah hesitated. Experience had taught her to be wary of strange men's help, but there was something about Jake Cooper that spoke of honest work and simple kindness, the same qualities she'd seen in Thomas. "I'd be grateful," she said. "I'm Sarah Mitchell." Recognition flickered in his eyes. Her situation wasn't exactly a secret in these parts, but he made no comment. Instead, he set to work, retrieving tools from his saddlebags with the efficiency of someone used to handling trail repairs. As he worked, they spoke of simple things: the weather, the promising look of the spring grass, the price of goods in town. His voice was low and pleasant, carrying no expectation of response but filling the silence comfortably. Sarah found herself relaxing despite her usual guardedness. "Lost my own place a few years back," he said quietly as he worked, the admission offered without self-pity. "Know something about starting over." His hands never stopped moving as he spoke, skilled fingers weaving new life into the broken wheel. There was a shared understanding in those words that touched something deep in Sarah's heart. Here was someone who knew the weight of dreams, the cost of holding on to them, and the dignity in continuing despite loss. The repair took shape under his careful attention, strips of rawhide and spare wood coming together in a way that spoke of trail-learned ingenuity. When he finished, the wheel looked sturdy enough to make town, though it would need proper repair soon. "I'm obliged to you, Mr. Cooper," Sarah said as he helped her back onto the wagon seat. Their hands touched briefly in the exchange, calloused palm against calloused palm, working hands, both of them. "Jake," he corrected gently. "And the obligation's mutual, Mrs. Mitchell. Sometimes the best medicine for one's own troubles is helping with someone else's." As he mounted his horse, the morning sun caught something gold at Sarah's throat, and Jake glimpsed the locket she wore. For a moment, their eyes met in shared recognition of life's deeper currents, of paths crossed, not entirely by chance. "Safe travels," he said, touching his hat brim once more before turning his horse toward town. Sarah watched him go, the repaired wheel moving smooth and true beneath her. Neither of them could have known they'd just taken the first step on a journey that would change both their lives forever. The Silver Creek Saloon fell quiet as Blackwood's men shouldered through the batwing doors. Jake Cooper nursed his coffee at the corner table, eyes lowered but ears alert. He'd chosen this spot carefully, close enough to hear, far enough to avoid notice. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Jenkins and two others settled at a nearby table, their voices carrying in the hushed room. "Boss wants it done tonight," Jenkins said. His words meant for his companions, but floating clear in the still-bound air. No more waiting. Jake's hand tightened imperceptibly around his cup. He'd seen them deliver something to the Mitchell place earlier, watched from a distance as Sarah collected an envelope from her gatepost. The memory of her face from their chance meeting days ago surfaced unbidden, proud but weary, beautiful, in the way of wilderness flowers that bloom despite harsh conditions. "Shame about accidents," one of the other men chuckled, the sound ugly with anticipation. "Especially with them dry conditions. One spark and whoosh," he made a flying gesture with his hand. The coffee turned bitter in Jake's mouth. He'd seen this before, back in Wyoming territory. Good people burned out by men who wrapped greed in the language of progress. His mother's Bible verse echoed in his mind. "Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy." Rising quietly, he left a coin on the table and stepped out into the afternoon glare. Thunder nickered a greeting from the hitching post, but Jake's mind was already racing ahead to the Mitchell homestead. Sarah would have read the letter by now. Whatever threat it contained, she was alone out there with night coming on. The bank draft in his pocket, his last attempt to extend his loan, seemed to weigh heavier now. He had his own troubles, his own battles to fight. Getting involved would only complicate things, maybe make them worse for everyone. Thunder's reins were in his hand when Marshal Evans emerged from his office across the street. The lawman's eyes met Jake's briefly, then slid away with studied disinterest. That look said everything about how much help Sarah Mitchell could expect from official channels. "Might as well head home, boy," Jake murmured to Thunder, swinging into the saddle. But he turned the horse east instead of north, toward the Mitchell place instead of his own struggling ranch. Some decisions, he reflected, made themselves. He found Sarah in her dooryard, the threatening letter crushed in one hand. Even from a distance, he could see the rigid set of her shoulders, the way she stood like a tree facing into storm winds. She turned at the sound of hoofbeats, her other hand moving toward the cabin door where, he suspected, a shotgun waited. "Mr. Cooper," she said, relaxing slightly but not entirely. "Twice in 1 week people will talk." "Jake," he reminded her, dismounting. "And let them." He nodded toward the crumpled paper in her hand. "Bad news." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Just Blackwood's way of being neighborly, reminding me how dangerous it is for a woman alone." She straightened, squaring those proud shoulders. "I won't sell, no matter what kind of accidents he's planning." Jake stepped closer, close enough to see the fear she was fighting beneath. Her brave front. "Those accidents they're planning?" He kept his voice gentle. "They're coming tonight." The color drained from her face, but her voice remained steady. "You're certain?" "Heard it myself. And the marshal's already decided not to notice anything that happens out here." He glanced at the sun, measuring the remaining daylight. "I can help if you'll let me, but we need to prepare." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her hand going to the locket at her throat. The simple gold caught the late sunlight, flashing, like a signal mirror. "Why?" she asked finally. "You've got your own troubles. I saw you leaving the bank earlier." "My mother would say it's because it's right," Jake answered honestly. "My father would say it's because a man can't always choose his battles, but he can choose which ones he walks away from." He smiled slightly. "Me? I just don't cotton to bullies, no matter how fancy their suits." Something shifted in Sarah's expression, trust winning out over caution. She nodded once, decisively. "Then we'd better get started. Night comes early this time of year." They moved together toward the cabin, 2 people against what was coming. The threatening letter fell forgotten in the dust, its promises of violence, about to be answered with an unexpected defense, the simple courage of those who stand their ground against darkness. Darkness settled over the valley like a held breath. Jake Cooper stood at the cabin's window, his shadow barely visible against the interior gloom. They doused every lamp hours ago, letting the night wrap around them like a cloak. Beside him, Sarah Mitchell waited with the same taut stillness he'd seen in trail horses before a storm breaks. "They'll come from the east," he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "Use the rimrock shadows for cover until they're close." The moon was rising, a silver dollar tossed across the sky, casting just enough light to make shadows treacherous. Sarah's hand rested near the family photograph on the mantel, her last image of Thomas, taken just weeks before the pneumonia took him. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "This isn't your fight." Jake turned from the window, catching her eyes in the dim light. "It became my fight when men decided burning out a widow was acceptable business." His voice held no drama, just the simple truth of it. They'd spent the afternoon preparing, moving horses to the far pasture, soaking the roof with precious water from the well, setting up firing positions. Jake had seen the determination in Sarah's eyes as she checked and loaded her husband's old Winchester. She handled it with the confidence of a woman raised on ranch land, though he prayed she wouldn't need to use it. The first sign came just past midnight, a flicker of movement in the tree line, more sensed than seen. Jake touched Sarah's arm lightly, directing her attention. Neither spoke. They'd planned for this, knew their positions. Sarah moved to the back window, while Jake stayed forward, both commanding clear views of the approaching shadows. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. A burning bottle arced through the night, spinning end over end, before smashing against the water-soaked roof. Flames spread but didn't catch, dying against the wet wood. More followed, a rain of fire painting. Savage streaks across the dark. "That's right," Jake muttered. "Waste your ammunition." He'd counted at least 6 men by their movements, more than expected, but not enough to change the odds significantly, not with surprise on their side. A shot cracked the night, splintering. Wood near the window. Jake dropped low, returning fire with measured precision. He heard Sarah's rifle speak from the back of the cabin, the sharp report followed by a cry of pain from the darkness. Pride mingled with concern. She was holding her own, but every exchange of fire increased the danger. Then he saw it, the real threat. While the others kept them pinned with gunfire, 2 men were working their way around to the barn, carrying something that looked too much like an oil can. If they got that fire started, with the hay stored inside— "Sarah!" he called. "The barn!" She understood immediately. "Go! I'll cover you!" Jake was moving before the words fully left her mouth, keeping low as he slipped through the side door. The night air hit him like a plunge into cold water, carrying the sharp scent of gunsmoke and fear. Sarah's rifle cracked steadily behind him, forcing the attackers to keep their heads down. He made it halfway to the barn before they spotted him. The night erupted in a fury of muzzle flashes. Jake felt the first bullet tear through his coat sleeve, more following like angry hornets. But he couldn't stop, not with the barn and everything Sarah owned at stake. The oil carriers saw him coming, dropped their burden to reach for weapons. Jake's gun roared twice in the darkness. One man fell, the other scrambled for cover. The oil can lay between them, a deadly promise waiting to be kept. More shots rang out, and sudden fire bloomed along Jake's side. The pain was distant, unimportant. He reached the oil can, kicked it away from the barn's dry timber. Movement caught his eye. The second man rising, gun leveled. Jake's return. Shot was pure instinct, years of practice condensed into a single deadly moment. The man collapsed without a sound, but others were coming, drawn by the gunfire. Jake could see them moving in the moonlight, trying to flank his position. "Sarah!" he shouted. "Get out! Use the back trail!" They'd planned for this too, a route through the creek bed hidden by willows. If she moved now while he drew their fire— A bullet found his shoulder, spinning him against the barn wall. Another scored across his ribs. The pain arrived in earnest now, but with it came a strange clarity. He thought of his mother's Bible, of pressed flowers and words about sacrifice, about a man's worth being measured by what he was willing to give. Sarah's voice carried from the cabin, desperate, with understanding. "Jake, don't you dare!" But he was already moving, pushing away from the barn's shelter. His gun thundered in the darkness, drawing all attention his way. He heard running feet. Sarah making for the creek trail, he prayed. And then nothing mattered except keeping the attackers focused on him. More bullets found him, but he kept firing, kept moving. The night filled with gun smoke and shouts of confusion. Someone was calling for Blackwood's men to fall back. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance, hadn't counted on a man with nothing left to lose. Through it all, Jake caught glimpses of the cabin where Sarah had lived, where she'd built a life from grief and courage. On the mantel inside, he knew, that family photograph still waited. Thomas smiling out at the world that had taken him. Too soon. Jake hoped Sarah would forgive him for adding another ghost to her collection. The moon sailed on, indifferent to the drama below. Blood ran warm down Jake's side, but he stayed on his feet, kept shooting until the attackers finally broke and ran. Only then did he allow himself to slide down the barn wall, his mother's words echoing in his mind. A man's worth isn't measured by what he owns. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Sarah's photograph tumbling from the mantel, caught in a stray breeze through the bullet-riddled window. It landed in a shaft of moonlight, edges curling slightly from the heat of battle, a moment of peace preserved despite the violence that had raged around it. Then darkness took him, and Jake Cooper knew no more. Dawn crept into the cabin like a shy visitor, illuminating the aftermath of the night's violence. Sarah's hands moved steadily as she cleaned Jake's wounds, though her heart thundered against her ribs. The blood-stained bandana she'd torn from his neck lay beside her, its blue fabric now dark with sacrifice. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met," she murmured to his unconscious form, "or the most foolish." Her voice caught slightly. "Perhaps both." Jake stirred beneath her touch, fever-bright eyes opening to find her face. "Did we save it?" he asked, voice rough as creek gravel. "The barn. You saved everything," Sarah answered softly. "The barn, the house, me." She wrung out a fresh cloth in the basin of cool water. "Though you nearly got yourself killed doing it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Worth it." His eyes closed again, but his hand found hers, calloused fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising strength. "Couldn't let them win. Not after seeing you fight so hard. To keep it all." Sarah's free hand went to her locket, a gesture of comfort now shared between them. The morning light caught the gold, throwing warm reflections across Jake's weathered face. In the quiet, she could hear birds beginning their morning songs outside, nature's reminder that life continued despite human dramas. "My father," she said slowly, "always told me to judge a man not by his words, but by what he's willing to risk." Her fingers traced the edge of the blood-stained bandana. "I've never seen anyone risk so much for a stranger." "Not strangers anymore," Jake murmured, his eyes opening again to meet hers. Something passed between them in that moment, deep as mountain roots and just as strong. "Some things, some people are worth bleeding for." Sarah's hands stilled in their work. The morning sun painted the cabin's interior in shades of gold and amber, catching dust motes that danced like memory made visible. Through the window, she could see Thomas's photograph where it had fallen, its edges darkened by smoke, but the image still clear, a reminder of love's endurance beyond loss. "Rest," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm. "I've sent word to Doc Wilson in town. And don't worry about Blackwood's men returning. My father may not approve of my choices, but he taught me well. I've got good eyes and a steady hand with this rifle." Jake's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Never doubted that." His voice was fading, sleep or exhaustion pulling him under again. Just couldn't bear seeing another good soul burned out by evil men. As he drifted off, Sarah lifted the blood-stained bandana, its fabric still damp with the proof of his courage. Such a simple thing, yet now transformed into something more, a testament to the moment when one person chooses to stand between another and harm's way. She moved to the window, watching the sun climb above the eastern hills. The morning revealed signs of the night's battle, scorched earth where the fire bottles had landed, brass cartridges glinting in the grass, a few dark stains that would soon be washed away by weather and time. But something else had been born in the night's crucible, something that made her hands gentle as she tended Jake's wounds, that caused her heart to tighten when his fever spiked, something that felt dangerous and wonderful and inevitable as a spring flood. The blood-stained bandana caught the light as she folded it carefully, tucking it away with the same reverence she gave to Thomas's photograph. Both were artifacts of love now, different kinds of love, perhaps, but no less precious for their differences. Outside, a rider appeared on the road. Doc Wilson, she hoped, coming to ensure Jake's recovery. Sarah touched the locket at her throat once more, a gesture of gratitude now rather than worry. Whatever came next, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was no longer facing it alone. Doc Wilson's weathered hands smoothed the brittle newspaper clipping across Sarah's kitchen table. Beside it lay something that made her breath catch. A wanted poster, its edges yellow with age, showing a younger Victor Blackwood under a different name. The afternoon sun, slanting through the window, illuminated both documents like evidence laid bare before a court. "Found these in my old files," the doctor said quietly, glancing toward the bedroom where Jake rested. "Been holding on to them for years, waiting for the right time. After what happened here last night," he shook his head, "people ought to know what kind of man they're dealing with." Sarah studied the poster's faded text. James Victor Black, wanted for arson and murder in Colorado Territory, 1868. Her fingers traced the words as if touching them might make them more real. 7 homesteaders burned out, 3 didn't survive. "He came here with a new name and clean papers," Doc Wilson continued. "Money has a way of making certain questions go unasked, but I was working in Colorado back then. Treated some of his victims." The old man's eyes grew distant with memory. "Never forgot those faces, or his." From the bedroom came the sound of Jake shifting in his sleep. His fever had broken that morning, strength returning slowly but steadily. Sarah found herself listening for his breathing the way she used to listen for Thomas's during that final illness. "Why come forward now?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Because of him." Doc Wilson nodded toward the bedroom. "Men like Jake Cooper, they're rare these days. When one of them stands up against evil, decent folks ought to stand with him." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "And because your father needs to see this." Sarah's hand went to her locket, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Harrison Wells isn't easily convinced." "No," the doctor agreed, "but he respects evidence, and he deserves to know the truth about the man who's been trying to buy up his daughter's land." A floorboard creaked, and they turned to find Jake standing in the bedroom doorway, one hand braced against the frame. His shirt was off, white bandages stark against his tanned skin. Despite his wounds, he carried himself with the same quiet dignity Sarah had noticed that first day by the broken wagon. "Should be in bed," she scolded gently, but there was no real force behind it. "Heard voices." Jake moved carefully to the table, his eyes falling on the wanted poster. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "So that's who we're dealing with." Doc Wilson gathered the documents carefully. "Thought you both should know. Blackwood's got the law in his pocket, but truth has a way of finding daylight." He stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll leave these with you. Maybe it's time the whole territory knew about James Victor Black and his Colorado activities." After the doctor left, Sarah and Jake stood studying the wanted poster in silence. The man in the photograph stared back at them with eyes already cold and calculating, though younger than the Blackwood they knew. "Explains a lot," Jake said finally. "Man like that, running from his past, he'd do anything to keep his new identity safe." His hand brushed Sarah's shoulder lightly. "Makes him more dangerous knowing this." Sarah leaned slightly into his touch, allowing herself to draw strength from his presence. "Also makes him vulnerable. If the right people knew," Jake corrected. "Your father, for instance, man of his standing in the territory, his word would carry weight." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. Sarah saw in Jake's face the same quiet determination she'd come to rely on, tempered now with something deeper, a tenderness that made her heart beat faster. "I'll need to ride to the Wells Ranch," she said. "Show father these documents. Make him understand what's really happening here." Jake straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "Not alone, you won't. You're hardly fit to ride. Try and stop me." His smile was gentle but firm. "Besides, your father should meet the man who helped defend his daughter's property. Might help him understand you're not as alone as he thinks." Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun and everything to do with the way Jake Cooper looked at her. The wanted poster lay between them on the table, a reminder of the dangers still ahead. But somehow facing those dangers together made them seem less daunting. "Tomorrow, then," she said. "We'll ride at first light. The old poster's edges curled in the warm air, its secrets finally exposed to the light of day. Like so many things, Sarah thought, truth had its own time for emerging from shadow. Sheriff Mills fingered the badge on his chest, the silver star, catching lamplight as he sat across from Blackwood's massive desk. Evening shadows gathered in the study's corners, but neither man had moved to light additional lamps. Some conversations, the sheriff knew, were better held in half-light. "Cooper's recovering at the Mitchell place," Mills reported, his voice carefully neutral. "Doc Wilson's been treating him." Blackwood's fingers drummed slowly on his desk, each tap like a hammer driving nails into the sheriff's conscience. "And you've done nothing about the shooting on my men. Self-defense is still legal in this territory." Mills shifted uncomfortably. They were on private property, armed. They were there on legitimate business. Blackwood's voice carried the soft menace of a rattler before it strikes. "Concerning water rights that I legally obtained, rights that you witnessed, as I recall." The sheriff's hand went again to his badge, feeling its weight. He remembered another weight, the envelope of cash that had accompanied his appointment, Blackwood's investment in proper law enforcement, as he'd called it. "There's talk in town," Mills said carefully, "about Colorado territory, about a man named James Victor Black." The drumming fingers stilled. In the dim light, Blackwood's face became a mask of stone. Dangerous talk, the kind that could get a man's badge taken away, or worse. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Mills thought of his family, of the house his Blackwood supplemented salary had bought, of how quickly it could all disappear. "I'll handle it," he said finally, standing. "Send some deputies out tomorrow. Make it official, investigate the shooting, serve some warnings about water access." "Good man." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And Mills, if Cooper or the woman resist, well, law officers sometimes have to defend themselves." Tragic, but understandable. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Mills paused at the study door, his badge feeling suddenly heavy as a millstone. "They say Cooper's got a reputation. Good with a gun. Respected. Had a reputation," Blackwood corrected softly. Past tense. "He's wounded now. Trapped defending. A woman's lost cause. Smart man would cut his losses, leave the territory while he can still ride." The sheriff nodded, understanding the unspoken command. As he walked into the gathering storm, his hand kept straying to his badge, its surface smooth from years of similar troubled touches. Once, it had meant something different: protection, justice, a young man's ideals. Now, it was just another tool in Blackwood's arsenal, its shine dulled by compromise and fear. At the Mitchell homestead, Jake Cooper stood at the window despite his healing wounds, watching the same storm approach. Sarah moved quietly behind him, setting a lamp against the growing darkness. "Sheriff's been to see Blackwood," Jake said, his voice tight with certainty. "They'll come with badges next time. Try to make it legal." Sarah joined him at the window, close enough that their shoulders barely touched. "Then we'll face that too." Her voice carried the strength he'd come to rely on. "Father's messenger. Should reach the Wells Ranch by morning. Once he sees the wanted poster, if he sees it." Jake turned to face her, his expression grave. "Blackwood's got men watching the roads. That poster's not just evidence, Sarah. It's a death warrant. For anyone carrying it." Lightning flickered, illuminating their faces in stark relief. Sarah's hand found her locket, but this time Jake's fingers covered hers, warm and reassuring against the cold metal. "We could leave," she said softly, testing the words. "Walk away. Let him have the land. Your life is worth more than—" No, the word was gentle, but final. "Running from men like Blackwood only makes them stronger, gives them permission to keep destroying lives." His hand tightened slightly over hers. "Besides, some things are worth fighting for. Some people, too." The moment stretched between them, charged as the storm-heavy air. Sarah felt the steady beat of Jake's heart where their hands joined over her locket, its rhythm somehow more real than the thunder's distant rumble. "Dawn, then," she said. We'll leave for Father's ranch at first light before the sheriff can serve his papers. Take the creek trail. They won't expect that." Jake nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. They both knew what wasn't being said, that a badge could make murder look legal, that justice wasn't always on the side of the just. But they also knew that some battles chose you, and honor demanded you face them standing. Harrison Wells stood at his study window, watching the riders approach through the morning mist. Even at a distance, he recognized his daughter's straight-backed posture in the saddle, stubborn as her mother had been. God rest her soul. The man riding beside her was less familiar, though the way he favored his left side spoke of recent injury. The heavy gold ring on Harrison's finger caught the light as he lifted his coffee cup. 5 generations of Wells men had worn this ring, its surface worn smooth by years of difficult decisions. He'd always assumed Thomas would wear it. One day, before pneumonia rewrote that future. "They're here, sir," his foreman announced from the doorway. "Send them in, John." Harrison didn't turn from the window. "And bring fresh coffee." Sarah entered first, her steps sure on the familiar floorboards. The man, Cooper, according to the messenger's report, followed with the measured grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading situations and people. "Father." Sarah's voice carried warmth, despite their months of disagreement. Harrison turned finally, taking in his daughter's face, searching for signs of hardship or wavering resolve. Instead, he found something unexpected, a quiet strength that reminded him painfully of her mother. "You're looking well," he said gruffly, gesturing to the chairs before his desk. His eyes moved to Cooper, noting the way the man waited for Sarah to sit first. "Though I hear there's been trouble. There's this first." Sarah placed a weathered wanted poster on his desk. "Before we discuss anything else." Harrison settled into his chair, lifting the poster into better light. The ring on his finger felt suddenly heavy as he read, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he looked up to find both Sarah and Cooper watching him intently. "James Victor Black," he said slowly. "Victor Blackwood. Should have seen it myself." His fingers traced the ring's worn surface, a habit formed through years of contemplation. "How long have you known?" "Doc Wilson brought us the proof yesterday." Sarah leaned forward. "Father, he's the same man who's been pressuring you to support his water rights claims. The same man who tried to burn me out last night." Harrison's head snapped up. "Burn you out?" His voice carried the first crack in its careful control. "You didn't mention that in your message, because I knew you'd come charging in with half the ranch hands," Sarah said softly. "And we need to handle this carefully. Blackwood has the sheriff in his pocket, and enough men to make force dangerous." "She's right." Cooper spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of experience. "But with your influence in the territory, and this evidence of who he really is." Harrison studied the man who'd stood between his daughter and harm. The messenger had described the night's events in detail, how Cooper had taken multiple bullets to protect not just Sarah, but the land and memory of a man who should have been his rival. "You could have walked away," Harrison said to Cooper. "Man in your position, wounded, facing odds like that. No one would have blamed you." "Some would have, sir." Cooper's eyes met his steadily. "I would have." Something shifted in Harrison's chest, a recognition of the kind of honor he'd feared no longer existed in the changing territory. His hand went again to the family ring, thinking of generations of Wells men who'd built their legacy on similar bedrock principles. "Sarah," he turned to his daughter, "that land, it's more than just acres to you, isn't it?" "It's everything Thomas and I dreamed of," she said quietly. "But more than that now. It's where I learned I could stand on my own, where I discovered strength I never knew I had." Her hand found her locket, and Harrison noticed how Cooper's presence seemed to steady her, with help sometimes, but my own strength all the same. Harrison nodded slowly, years of pride and worry and love weighing as heavy as the ring on his finger. "Then we'll stop him, not with bullets or brute force, though I've got plenty of both if needed, but with the law itself turned back against him like a mirror showing his true face." He stood, sunlight catching the ring as he moved to stand before Cooper. "My daughter chose well twice now. First Thomas, who taught her to dream, and now you, who taught her those dreams are worth fighting for." He extended his hand. "Welcome to the family's battle, son. Let's show Blackwood what happens when he threatens a Wells legacy." The morning sun streamed through the study windows, gleaming off the family ring like a promise kept, a future preserved. Sometimes, Harrison thought, watching his daughter's face glow with renewed purpose, the finest legacies weren't the ones you planned, but the ones that found you when you were wise enough to recognize their worth. Property maps and land deeds covered Harrison Wells' massive oak desk, their yellowed edges overlapping like autumn leaves. Jake Cooper traced a finger along the creek that bordered Sarah's land, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. "Here's what Blackwood's been hiding," he said, shifting one map to align with another. "The water rights he bought don't just control access to the creek. They control access to every major water source between here and Silver Creek Town." Sarah leaned closer, her shoulder brushing Jake's as she studied the documents. The contact sent warmth through his healing wounds, a reminder of why this fight mattered beyond just justice. "He's creating a monopoly," Harrison mused, his family ring tapping thoughtfully against the desk. "Control the water, control the territory. And every rancher, farmer, and homesteader who needs it," Sarah added. Her finger traced a line of properties along the creek. "These families here, they've already sold out to him, couldn't survive without water access." Jake nodded grimly. "Same strategy he used in Colorado. Squeeze them dry, then buy them out for pennies. Only difference is, this time he's doing it legal-like, or appearing to." Harrison lifted another document, a survey map from the Territory Land Office. "Not as legal as he thinks. Look here." He pointed to a notation in faded ink. "The original water rights were granted to the native tribes, then transferred to the territory government in the Treaty of '63. Blackwood's claims all stem from that transfer. But if the transfer wasn't valid," Sarah's eyes lit with understanding, "then everything he's built is on quicksand," Jake finished, "including his hold over the sheriff's office." A knock at the study door interrupted them. John, the foreman, entered with a fresh pot of coffee and news from town. "Sheriff's deputies are asking questions, sir, about Mr. Cooper and the shooting at Miss Sarah's place." Harrison's expression hardened. "Let them ask. We've got questions of our own they'll need to answer soon enough." He turned back to the maps. "The tribal council still meets at the old mission. Their records would prove whether the water rights transfer was valid. If they'll share them," Sarah cautioned, "they have little reason to trust any of us." Jake straightened, wincing slightly as his wounds protested. "They might trust me. Worked with Chief Walking Bear's people during the drought of '71. Helped them protect their herds from rustlers." Harrison studied him with newfound respect. "That would help, but we'll need more. Blackwood's got friends in the territorial capital, judges in his pocket. Then we go above them." Sarah's voice carried quiet conviction. "The federal marshal's office. They've been looking for James Victor Black for years, and unlike our local law, they're beyond Blackwood's influence." Jake watched her with pride, seeing the same strength that had first drawn him to her. She wasn't just fighting for her land anymore. She was fighting for justice itself, for everyone Blackwood had ever wronged. "It'll take time," Harrison warned. "Time we may not have, with Blackwood pushing for control." "Then we buy time," Jake said. "The wanted poster's not our only weapon. Once people know who he really is, how he operates." He gestured to the overlapped maps. "These tell a story of systematic corruption and theft, masked as progress." Sarah's hand found her locket, but this time the gesture spoke of determination rather than worry. "We can reach out to the other landowners, the ones who haven't sold yet, show them these maps, help them understand what's really happening. Unite them against him." Harrison nodded slowly. "While we gather the proof we need from the tribal council and wait for the federal marshal." Jake began gathering the maps carefully, organizing them by area and date. Each one was a piece of the puzzle, a thread in the web Blackwood had woven. Together, They painted a picture of corruption that could no longer hide in shadow. "He'll fight back," Sarah said softly, "when he realizes what we're doing." Jake's hand covered hers where it rested on the maps. "Let him. This time he's not facing a lone widow or a single wounded man. This time he's facing the whole territory, once they know the truth." Harrison watched them, seeing more than just allies in a common cause. The way they moved together strengthened each other. It reminded him of his own late wife, of the power of having someone to fight beside. The maps spread before them like a battle plan, each carefully marked boundary, and watercourse, a line of defense against evil. But the real strength, Harrison knew, wasn't in the papers on his desk. It was in the hearts of those who chose to stand against darkness, no matter the cost. Sarah found the letter on her pillow when she returned to her room at the Wells Ranch, the paper rough and honest as the man who'd written it. Jake's handwriting was careful but unpracticed, each word placed deliberately on the page, like fence posts in open country. "Dear Sarah," it began, and her heart quickened at the simple greeting. "A man ought to speak his mind plain, my father always said. But some truths are harder to voice than others, especially when they grow in your heart so gradual you hardly notice until they've taken root. I've been trying to find the right words since that first day by the broken wagon. You had such quiet, strength about you, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. Reminded me of the mountains at dawn, steady and true, no matter what storms have passed in the night. These past days, watching you fight for your land, for what's right, I've come to understand something. A person's worth isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in what they're willing to stand for. You've stood tall against men who would have broken others, and my admiration has grown with each passing day. I know you carry Thomas in your heart, in that locket close to your skin. A love like that leaves its mark on a soul. I'm not asking to replace those memories. They're part of what's made you the woman you are. But if you've room in your heart for new hopes, new dreams, well, I'd count myself blessed to walk that path with you. Whatever comes with Blackwood, whatever battles lie ahead, know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost, a reason to believe in possibilities again. With deepest affection, Jake." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, feeling her heart beat against the simple paper. Through her window, she could see Jake in the courtyard below, discussing something with her father. Even from this distance, she could read the quiet dignity in his bearing, the way he carried his healing wounds like medals rather than burdens. The evening sun painted the scene in shades of amber and gold, reminding her of that first morning when he'd appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. She'd been so focused on survival then, on holding on to Thomas's dream, that she hadn't recognized the stirring of new dreams in her heart. Her fingers found the locket at her throat, opening it to study the familiar faces within. Thomas smiled up at her, young and full of hope. But for the first time, she saw his image differently, not as a ghost to cling to, but as a chapter in her story that had led her here to this moment, to these new feelings blooming like wildflowers after rain. "You'd understand, wouldn't you?" she whispered to Thomas's photograph. "You always said love was about growing, not grinding to a halt." A knock at her door broke her reverie. "Sarah?" Jake's voice, warm and real. "Your father's called a meeting with some of the neighboring ranches. Thought you'd want to be there." "Coming," she answered, tucking the letter into her dress pocket close to her heart. When she opened the door, Jake stood waiting, his eyes finding hers with a question. "In them?" She answered by reaching for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I got your letter," she said softly. "Wasn't sure if I should," he began, but she stopped him with a gentle squeeze of his hand. It was perfect. True and honest, like you. Something shifted in Jake's expression, hope brightening his features like sunrise touching mountain peaks. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, but his calloused fingers spoke of real work and genuine feeling. "We've got hard days ahead," he said quietly. Sarah stepped closer, letting herself lean into his strength, but not alone. Never alone again. The setting sun through the window wrapped them in golden light, blessing this moment of quiet truth between battles. Sarah felt Jake's heart beating steady and strong where their shoulders touched, and knew that sometimes love came not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in simple letters written from the heart, in hands clasped against whatever storms might come. Together they descended to meet the gathering ranchers, their steps matched and sure. The letter rustled in Sarah's pocket with each stride, its words already committed to memory, a compass pointing toward a future neither had dared imagine until now. The old pocket watch in Jake's vest ticked steadily as the first riders appeared on the horizon. It had been his father's timepiece, marking the hours of a lifetime's honest work. Now it counted down the moments to what might be the most important stand of his life. 8 men, he murmured to Sarah, who stood beside him on the Wells ranch porch, Blackwoods in front. Harrison Wells emerged from the house, his family ring catching the morning light. "Tribal Council's messenger got through?" he asked quietly. Jake nodded. "Should be reaching the federal marshal's office by nightfall. We just need to hold till then." "Hold what?" Blackwood's voice carried across the yard as his group reined to a stop. "A conspiracy of thieves and trespassers?" His smile was cold as a snake's. "I have legal documents showing water rights violations and witnesses to a shooting on my men." Sarah's hand found Jake's, squeezing once before letting go. They'd expected this, Blackwood's attempt to twist the law to his purposes, but they hadn't expected him to bring so many guns. "Funny thing about legal documents," Harrison called back. "They're only as valid as the man signing them. Isn't that right, Mr. Black?" The change in Blackwood's expression was subtle but unmistakable. His eyes narrowed, hand dropping casually to his gun belt. "Dangerous accusations, Wells, the kind that could get people hurt. No more dangerous than burning out homesteaders." "In Colorado," Jake said, his voice carrying clear in the morning air. "Or using false water rights to steal land here." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained clear. The pocket watch ticked on, marking each heartbeat of silence that followed Jake's words. Blackwood's men shifted uneasily, glancing at their leader. "Sheriff Mills is on his way," Blackwood said finally, "with deputized men, enough to handle whatever lies you're spreading." His smile returned, sharp as a blade. "But I'm giving you one chance. Clear out now. All of you. Keep your lives, if not your land. And if we don't—" Sarah stepped forward, her quiet strength drawing all eyes. "Will you burn us out too? Add our names to the list of lives you've destroyed?" Blackwood's facade cracked slightly. "You have no proof of anything." "We have the Tribal Council records," Harrison said, "showing the water rights transfer was never legal. We have witnesses from Colorado, and we have this." He held up the wanted poster. "You're past catching up at last." The change was instant. Blackwood's hand flashed toward his gun, but Jake was already moving. His first shot caught Blackwood's shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. The yard erupted in gunfire. Sarah's rifle cracked beside Jake, her aim steady and true. Harrison's men emerged from their hidden positions around the ranch buildings, catching Blackwood's riders in a devastating crossfire. But Blackwood himself had recovered, and his return shot struck Jake's chest with shocking force. The pocket watch in Jake's vest exploded in a shower of gears and springs, its final tick lost in the chaos of battle. He staggered but kept his feet, knowing the timepiece had just saved his life. Sarah's cry of alarm turned to one of rage as she sent another shot at Blackwood. "The house!" Harrison shouted. "Fall back!" They retreated in good order, taking cover behind the thick walls. Through the window, Jake saw more riders approaching, but these wore badges, Sheriff Mills leading them. "Right on time!" Blackwood snarled, blood staining his fine coat. "Sheriff, these people are resisting arrest. They've attacked legal authorities." But Mills reined up short, his expression troubled. Behind him, his deputies seemed uncertain. looking between the wounded combatants with growing unease. "Legal authorities?" A new voice rang out. "Like you were in Colorado, Mr. Black?" Everyone turned to see Doc Wilson riding up and beside him. Jake's heart leaped. The federal marshal himself, badge glinting in the morning light. The messenger had reached them after all, faster than anyone had expected. "These men are under federal jurisdiction now," the marshal announced. "Sheriff Mills, stand down your deputies." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "Mills, I own you. Do your duty." But the sheriff straightened in his saddle, years of compromise falling away as he made his choice. "No, sir, not anymore." He turned to his men. "Stand down." "No!" Blackwood's gun came up again, aiming not at Jake this time, but at Sarah. "You take everything from me. I'll take what matters most to you." The world slowed to the rhythm of a broken pocket watch. Jake saw the fury in Blackwood's eyes, saw Sarah starting to duck, knew she wouldn't be fast enough. His body moved without a conscious thought, pushing her aside as he fired. 2 shots rang out as one. Blackwood's bullet creased Jake's already wounded shoulder. Jake's shot took Blackwood high in the chest, a killing blow delivered with the accuracy of a lifetime's practice. Victor Blackwood, James Victor Black, toppled from his saddle dead before he hit the ground. His remaining men threw down their weapons, seeing their odds vanish with their leader. Sarah was at Jake's side instantly, helping him stay upright as reaction set in. His father's broken pocket watch fell from his vest, its insides scattered, like the pieces of Blackwood's empire. "Guess I owe you a timepiece," she said softly, her hands gentle on his wounds. Jake managed a smile despite the pain. "Worth it. Though I admit I'd rather not make a habit of stepping in front of bullets for you." "Then don't," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "Stay beside me instead." Around them, the federal marshal was taking charge, arranging for prisoners and evidence. Harrison spoke with Sheriff Mills, who looked like a man awakening from a long nightmare. Doc Wilson hurried over to tend to Jake's wounds, clucking at the close call with the watch. But Jake barely noticed any of it, lost in Sarah's eyes. The broken pocket watch lay forgotten in the dust, its time ended. But as Sarah's arms held him steady and her love shone clear in her face, Jake knew that some endings were really beginnings in disguise. "Beside you," he agreed softly, "for all the time we have." Thunder rumbled again, and this time rain began to fall, washing away blood and gun smoke, cleaning the land for a new chapter. The time for violence was over. The time for healing of bodies, hearts, and the territory itself was just beginning. The silver bullet rolled across Harrison Wells's desk, catching morning light through the study windows. It was the last round Jake had fired, recovered from where Blackwood fell, a simple thing to carry such weight of history. "The federal marshal wants it as evidence," Harrison said, watching Jake and Sarah where they sat across from him. 2 weeks had passed since the shooting, time enough for wounds to begin healing and truth to come to light. Along with quite a story to tell, Sarah reached for the bullet but stopped short of touching it. "How many others?" she asked quietly. "How many homesteaders did he destroy before we stopped him?" 17 families in Colorado. The marshal himself spoke from the doorway, his arrival unannounced but not unwelcome. "Another 12 here? In the territory. We've been tracking his pattern for years, but he was careful. Changed names, bought officials, buried his tracks in legal paper." Jake's shoulder still ached where Blackwood's final shot had creased it, but he sat straighter as the marshal entered. "The families here, the ones who sold their land. What happens to them?" "That's actually why I'm here." The marshal laid a thick folder on Harrison's desk. "Territory judge is invalidating all of Blackwood's land deals. The water rights revert to original holders or their heirs. Everyone who was forced to sell under duress gets first right to reclaim their property." Sarah's hand found Jake's, squeezing gently. They both knew what this meant. Families returning, communities rebuilding, wounds deeper than bullet holes finally healing. "There's more." Harrison lifted a document from his own papers. "The Tribal Council has proposed a new water-sharing compact. equal access for all landholders, overseen by a board of both tribal and settler representatives. No one person can control the territory's lifeblood again. The silver bullet caught the light once more as Sarah finally reached out to touch it. All that change from one piece of lead. Not the bullet, Jake said softly. The choices. Every person who chose to stand against evil instead of bowing to it. Doc Wilson keeping evidence all those years. The sheriff finally choosing right over easy. He looked at Sarah. You, refusing to be driven from your land. The marshal nodded, approvingly. Speaking of choices, the territory governor has asked me to stay on, help implement these changes. Going to need good people, people who understand both justice and mercy. He focused on Jake. Could use a man with your experience, Cooper. Territory Marshal's office has an opening. Jake felt Sarah's hand tighten on his, not in warning, but in support. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a lonely rancher about to lose his land. Now he had purpose again. Had love again. Might need some time to consider it, he said carefully. Take it, the marshal replied, but not too much. Changes are coming fast. Railroads pushing west, more settlers arriving every day. Territory needs law that stands for something besides money and influence. Harrison rose, walking to the window that overlooked his ranch, and beyond it, the vastness of the territory stretching toward distant mountains. When I first came here, it was all wild country. No law but what a man carried in his heart. He turned back, his family ring catching the light like the silver bullet. Maybe it's time for a different kind of law, one that protects more than punishes. Sarah stood, drawing Jake up beside her. Whatever you decide, she said softly, we'll face it together. The marshal gathered his papers, including the silver bullet that would help seal Blackwood's legacy in official records. But before he left, he paused. One more thing, Doc Wilson mentioned something about a wedding being planned. Color touched Sarah's cheeks, but her voice was steady. Next month, once Jake's shoulder is fully healed. Good, the marshal smiled. Territory could use more beginnings to balance out the endings. After he left, Harrison joined Jake and Sarah by the window. Outside, spring was painting the valley in shades of renewal. New grass covered the ground where Blackwood had fallen, nature already healing man's scars. Your mother's ring, Harrison said to Sarah. The one she left you. Might be time to take it from that drawer where you've kept it since Thomas died. Sarah's free hand went to her locket, not in worry this time, but in recognition of how love could change and grow. I think you're right, Father. Jake watched the play of emotions across her face, seeing their future in her eyes. Badge or no badge, he said quietly, my first duty will always be here, protecting what matters most. I know. She smiled up at him. Just like I know that bullet wasn't silver at all, no matter how it shines. But sometimes symbols matter more than substance. They remind us what we fought for, what we almost lost, what we gained in return. Harrison cleared his throat gruffly. Well, if you're taking that marshal's badge, Jake, you'll need a proper home base. That north section of Sarah's land, up. By the creek, good spot for a house, room for a family to grow. Jake felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with healing wounds. Yes, sir, though I thought I should ask properly first. He turned to Sarah. That is, if you'll have me? Land, name, and all? Sarah's answer was in her eyes before she spoke it. Yes, today and all our days. The silver bullet was gone with the marshal, but its work remained. Justice served, evil ended, love proven stronger than greed or fear. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, not a storm this time, but the sound of spring rain coming to nourish. New beginnings. Jake drew Sarah closer, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his. Tomorrow would bring challenges, badges to accept, houses to build, lives to intertwine. But for now, in this moment, they had everything that mattered. Love tested by fire, truth proven by sacrifice, and a future bright as morning sun on silver. The new deed lay on the kitchen table between them, its fresh ink barely dry in the late afternoon light. Jake traced the property lines with a gentle finger, still amazed at how life could change course like a river, finding new channels after a storm. North portion of the original Mitchell homestead, he read aloud, including water rights to Cooper's Creek. He looked up at Sarah with a raised eyebrow. Cooper's Creek, she smiled, setting down 2 cups of coffee. Father's idea. Said if you're going to be territory marshal, you should have something named after you. Her hand brushed his shoulder, careful of the healing wounds beneath his shirt. Besides, it's where we first met, by that broken wagon, the memory brought warmth to Jake's chest. Seems like a lifetime ago. It was, Sarah said softly, settling beside him. We were different people then. Through the open window came the sounds of construction, hammers ringing, men calling to each other as their new house took shape on the rise overlooking the creek. Harrison had insisted on providing the building crew, his wedding gift to them, taking physical form day by day. Doc Wilson stopped by earlier, Sarah continued, her fingers finding her locket out of habit. Says you're healing clean right on schedule. Jake nodded, covering her hand with his, just in time for the wedding. Though I notice he didn't say anything about going back to work yet. That's because he knows better than to argue with your future wife about such things. Her tone was light, but her eyes held echoes of those terrible moments when he'd stepped between her and Blackwood's final bullet. The deed rustled as Jake pulled her closer, letting her feel the strength returning to his arms. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. Not now, not ever. I know. She relaxed against him, trust evident in every line of her body. It's just, I've lost someone before. The thought of, hey, Jake turned her gently to face him. That badge doesn't change who I am, or what matters most. Territory Marshal just means I can better protect what we've built here, all of us. As if to emphasize his point, horses approached outside. Harrison Wells arriving with more of the neighboring ranchers. The weekly meetings had become a tradition, former victims of Blackwood's schemes, gathering to rebuild their community on stronger foundations. Jake, Sarah, Harrison's voice carried from the yard. Brought some visitors you'll want to meet. They rose together, Jake moving easier now than he had in weeks. Through the window, they could see Harrison dismounting alongside an older couple, their clothes trail-worn but dignified. The Hendersons, Sarah breathed, from Colorado. They were the first family Blackwood burned out. Jake squeezed her hand. Come to reclaim their story, if not their land. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the valley in hues of promise. The new house was already showing its bones against the sky, solid and true as the love that had inspired it. Sarah paused at the door, looking back at the deed on the table. It's more than just paper, isn't it? She said softly. It's a fresh start for all of us. Jake gathered her close, breathing in the honey scent of her hair. Paper's just a symbol, like that marshal's badge, or your mother's ring, or even Cooper's Creek. He smiled against her temple. The real deeds written in our hearts. They stepped out together into the afternoon light, ready to welcome visitors who had traveled so far carrying their own wounds, their own hopes for healing. The deed waited on the table behind them, no longer just a legal document, but a testament to love's power to rebuild what hatred had destroyed. Above them, the house continued to rise, each beam and board a promise of shelter for the future they would forge together. And somewhere in the distance, the creek that now bore Jake's name flowed sweet and clear, its waters no longer bitter with greed, but fresh with the taste of justice served and peace hard won. Sarah's mother's wedding ring caught the chapels. Light as Harrison placed it in Jake's palm, the simple gold band had waited years in a drawer, like a seed waiting for the right season to bloom. Now it seemed to glow with renewed purpose, a circle of promise ready to complete its journey. The small church was filled with familiar faces, neighboring ranchers, tribal council members, even the federal marshal, who'd made the journey back for this day. Doc Wilson sat in the front pew, beaming like a proud uncle. Through the open windows came the sound of spring birds and the sweet scent of wildflowers that decorated every surface. Sarah stood before Jake in her mother's restored wedding dress, her locket nestled at her throat, but today the locket lay open, both pictures visible, Thomas smiling his blessing from one side, while the other held a new photograph of Jake, taken just last week. Past and present loss and love, all carried close to her heart. "The ring," Reverend Matthews prompted gently. Jake's hands were steady as he held the band, though his voice carried the weight of every step that had led. "Them here." "This ring was your mother's," he said softly, meant for Sarah's ears alone, carried through hardship and joy, loss and hope. Like you, it bears the strength of its history, made more beautiful by what it survived. Sarah's eyes shone as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for this moment. Her own hands were sure as she took Harrison's family ring, passed down for this purpose, and placed it on Jake's finger. "A wise man once told me," she said, her voice clear in the hushed church, "that a person's worth isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in what they're willing to stand for. You stood for me, for justice, for love itself. This ring is more than gold. It's a promise that I'll always stand with you." Through the open windows, they could see their new house on the rise above Cooper's Creek, its fresh-painted walls, bright in the morning sun. The marshal's badge pinned to Jake's coat gleamed like a star, matching the light in his eyes as he gazed at his bride. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Matthews continued. But Jake and Sarah were lost in each other's eyes, seeing not just this moment, but all the moments that had led here. A broken wagon wheel, a desperate defense, a letter written from the heart. Each step of their journey reflected in the rings they now shared. The celebration spilled out of the church and across the valley, tables laden with food contributed by every family. Children played while adults shared stories. The community, coming together not just for a wedding, but for the healing it represented. Even the tribal elders had come, their presence a testament to the new understanding growing in the territory. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Jake found Sarah standing at the edge of their property, looking out over the land they now shared. Her mother's ring caught the light as she reached for his hand. "Happy?" he asked softly, though he could read the answer in her face. "Complete," she corrected, leaning into his strength. "I never thought I could feel this way again." "After Thomas," she touched her locket, then smiled up at Jake. "But love isn't a finite thing, is it? It grows, changes, finds new ways to bloom." Jake gathered her close, feeling the rightness of her in his arms. "Like that ring," he said. "It carried through one love story, now beginning another, holding all that history, all that hope." From the celebration behind them came the sound of music and laughter. Their guests had begun dancing, joy spilling across the land like the golden evening light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a marshal's duties, a ranch to run, a community to help rebuild. But for now, they had this moment, sealed with rings that carried generations of love and promise. "Dance with me?" Sarah asked, turning in Jake's arms. He smiled, drawing her back toward the celebration. "For all our days," he answered, and led his bride into their future, their rings catching the light like stars come down to earth, blessing this new beginning with the wisdom of all that had come before. The family portrait hangs in the front room of the Cooper homestead, capturing a moment 5 years after that fateful wedding day. Jake stands tall in his marshal's coat, Sarah seated beside him, their young daughter Emma perched on her lap. The girl's eyes hold her father's quiet strength and her mother's gentle wisdom, a legacy of love made flesh. Sarah's locket is visible in the portrait, as are the rings that Jake and Sarah wear, symbols of promises kept and dreams renewed. Through the window behind them, you can glimpse Cooper's Creek, its waters still flowing sweet and true, nourishing the land that love defended. The photograph doesn't show the scars Jake carries or the memories Sarah holds close, but it captures something more important, the peace they found together, the strength that comes from standing against darkness, the joy of building something that will outlast them both. In the valley below their home, other families have returned to put down roots. Children play where once bullets flew, and the waters flow free for all who need them. Some say it's a miracle how love can transform a place. But Jake and Sarah know better. They know that love isn't a miracle. It's a choice, made new each dawn, proven in the living of it. Like the portrait on their wall, it's a testament to the truth that some things are worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth building a life around. And in their daughter's eyes, the future shines bright as hope itself.